The big guy, Jerry Weintraub, didn't want me for this. He wouldn't even consider me for a reading. Every time my name came up for in the casting submittal process, he was adamant. He says, I don't want a comedian. I don't want a comic actor for this role. This is a heavyweight part. I want an actor.
He was the center of the Karate Kid, the serene mentor whose teachings defined an era. But off-screen, Pat Morita's life was far from peaceful. In the years leading up to his death, the actor who embodied Mr. Miyagi at last spoke out for the first time, sharing what actually happened behind the scenes. It was not all about dialogue, kicks, and crane positions. It was about struggles no camera ever recorded. What was the truth that he bore all those years, and why did he wait until he died to reveal it? The wall before Miyagi, when one remembers the Karate Kid, one immediately recalls Mr. Miyagi, the soft-spoken handyman with a wise eye, sparse words, and a meek power that sustained Daniel LaRusso through his darkest challenges. But what most fans never knew, until Pat Morita himself spoke out years later, is that the man who became Miyagi seldom got the opportunity. In fact, one of the most influential voices in Hollywood at the time was intent on keeping him away from the role altogether. Pat Morita had been best known as a comedian. Fans recalled him for light-hearted turns on television shows, fast one-liners, and a talent for making comedic delivery seem effortless. To most executives, that resume made him the last one who could credibly play a war-weary, emotionally wounded mentor. When the character of Mr. Miyagi was first discussed in casting meetings, Morita's name entered the room only to be brushed aside by producer Jerry Weintraub. Weintraub, a heavy hitter in the business, allegedly snapped that he didn't want a comic anywhere in this vicinity. He wanted gravitas. He wanted a heavyweight, someone who could make people believe in a man who wore tragedy and wisdom in silence. That was the wall. And for weeks, the wall held. Anytime Morita's name came up on a list, Weintraub turned it down. To him, America was teeming with actors who could do the job better. The casting directors and producers scoured everywhere else, browsing headshots, inviting actors who looked like the part, sounded like the part, or at least bore the pedigree Weintraub had in mind. Pat Morita? Not even thought about for a reading. But this is where fate started to curve. Director John Avildsen, already having established himself as a master of underdog tales with Rocky, was not keen on taking the same well-trod route. He realized that the Karate Kid's success rested on its ability to be more than what amounts to fighting or training sequence, i.e., to be a bond between mentor and pupil that was raw and human. And he didn't want to leave any stone unturned. Avildsen was adamant that all available candidates be read, whether or not Weintraub agreed. Pat Morita would go on to comment about how dreamlike it was to be part of that entire cattle call process. By the time his opportunity arrived, he was the final actor to be brought in, nearly afterthought. And the irony was not lost on him. The actor so utterly disregarded by the producer now was being noticed because the director would not give up. That moment. For an actor whose career had been reduced to years of going from small TV spots to stand-up work, this was greater than merely an audition. It was a surprise opportunity at a job that all the other actors were set on holding on to. To Morita, it was evidence of how unpredictable Hollywood could be. One day after completing work, when rejection could quietly open the door to a job the next day. Way back when, since everybody was so enamored of Miyagi, folks might recall forgetting that there was a time, albeit fleeting, when the air itself was heavy with potential tension over tiny details in casting discussions. Morita, though, would never forget it. He openly discussed, much later in life, the hair's breadth away from disaster that Weintraub's camp almost gave the project before it even began. It was the very obstinacy of John Avildsen to which Morita attributed transforming the direction of his entire career. This reminds us of more than just another behind-the-scenes rivalry. It reminds us of just how very delicate the creation of film legends is. One producer's fleeting judgment, one executive's dismissal, that single moment made all the difference. Had Avildsen stood firm, Morita would never have stepped into that audition room. And without Morita, the Karate Kid would not be the same tale we all know. That wall he finally encountered would turn out to be an impenetrable one in his creative pursuits, whereupon, as Pat himself would whimsically say over the years, walls should be climbed or cut through. Soon after, he stood on another thoroughly unfamiliar terrain, but not one even a spectator would even vaguely identify with the suave clown they had known. For the fellow who entered that audition room wasn't the suave TV comedian. He was a bearded, weary stranger straight from Hawaii, someone even he barely knew in the mirror. Hawaii, beard, and fate. By the early 1980s, Pat Morita's career was sailing into troubled waters. He had experienced fame previously, from stand-up clubs to sitcoms such as Happy Days, but the offers had diminished and the limelight seemed to be sliding out of his hands. Rather than pursuing parts in Hollywood, he had ended up in Hawaii, cobbling together a living on a piecework basis, emceeing political events, writing jingles for commercials, playing nightclubs. It wasn't flashy and it wasn't consistent, but it paid the bills. To outsiders, Morita's career appeared to be peacefully passing. To him, it seemed like he was just drifting in place, expecting something to appear. And then there was a choice that completely altered his look. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to grow his hair and beard long. Not for a character, not for a television show, plainly because he wanted to see what it was like. Pat later joked about it, commenting that he resembled a hippie more than an actor. But then, he didn't care. He wasn't pursuing casting directors or concerned about being camera-ready. He was just living, allowing his look to mirror the more tentative, rougher chapter he was reading. That beard, scruffy, out of character for him, would turn out to be a stroke of luck. He didn't realize at the time, but when the opportunity to audition for the Karate Kid finally arrived, that expression assisted in the creation of the image of a weathered man who had experienced hard times. It aged him, made him seem wiser, and more down-to-earth than audiences were accustomed to seeing from this comedian. Something that began as a personal preference became an inadvertent boon to his career. Pat had grown accustomed to accepting that silence was the motif of his life. In reality, when his agent contract was up, he even considered allowing it to lapse. Then he reconsidered and was providing his agent with a species of half-hearted reappointment. What the hell? Therefore, one afternoon, he departed from the office of his agent, believing no work was in store for him, and prepared to go back to Hawaii. This was when destiny came knocking with a thunderous yell. A deafening voice had boomed from upstairs. "Pat Morita!" The secretary dashed out, yelling that he had just exited the door. The agent hung out and motioned him back frantically. "Pat, get your butt inside. There's a script I believe is right for you." The script was The Karate Kid. It is the sort of tale that is too tidy for the movies. Someone should script a film about fate. Morita subsequently described it as being more of a dreamlike moment. There he was 1 foot out the door, prepared to leave Los Angeles, and resigning himself to the fact that whatever was going on, it was not here. And then suddenly, as if some last-second interception, the script landed on him. He read it. He enjoyed it. He consented to try out for John Avildsen. Then it did not seem like the change of life. A naked chance, another space, still another director. But then the timing, the beard, and the strangeness of being let back in the door just then all gave way to a grander design. When Morita discussed this incident in the past retrospectively, he described it in a tone of awe, as if thinking that maybe some unseen force had pushed him back in the direction he was meant to head. If he were not in Hawaii, he would not have been like Miyagi. Had he not signed back with his agent, there would have been no script to present him with. Had he not tapped his feet on the sidewalk that day, luck might have gone past him. All those small choices, mishaps, and turns came together into one open door, to read for a part that the producers never wanted him to see. And when he finally entered that audition room, what greeted him wasn't a table of executives or a panel of judges. It was one man strapped to a camera, watching him through the lens. Avildsen's one-man camera test, when Pat Morita finally received his opportunity to read for the Karate Kid, he anticipated the typical Hollywood arrangement. A casting assistant, a producer taking notes, perhaps even a writer in the corner, all sitting around to criticize his every sentence. But what he faced was an almost empty room, and directly into one of the most bizarre auditions of his life. Seated, there was John Avildsen, the director who had already etched his name in movie history with Rocky. But Avildsen wasn't seated comfortably behind a desk or casually browsing through a script. He was half man, half machine. On one half of his body, he was nursing a camera. On the other, he wore the heavy battery pack strapped against his back. He smiled warmly and introduced himself, but he never put down the camera. As soon as Morita entered, he was under camera. Morita would later say that upon first impression, he thought Avildsen was a half man, half director, half tape recorder. But hidden behind the jest was a valid point. Avildsen didn't want to see a smooth reading. He wanted to get the raw essence of the man before him, to find out if Pat could be Miyagi when no one else thought he could. "Tell me a little about yourself," Avildsen said, his eyes still peeking behind the lens. And so Pat talked, not in scripted dialogue, but in anecdotes about his life, his career, his good and bad times. At that time, he wasn't auditioning. He was opening a window into who he was. And Avildsen kept rolling. The script followed. Pat wasn't going to spout a safe line or two for the most difficult of scenes that had yet to be staged, choreographed, or anything else for that matter. He ad-libbed, leaning into the emotional need with all he had as Miyagi, sans sets, wardrobes, and other actor to play against. When he ended, he simply anticipated a cordial thank you and send-off. Rather, as he began to exit, Avildsen shouted out, "Pat, don't you want to take your script with you? You may need it." That single line was charged. It was the first time Morita realized that maybe, just maybe, he had breached the wall of skepticism around him. He had entered as a beard comedian. He emerged as someone who could quite possibly have turned into Mr. Miyagi against the odds. Avildsen had already decided. He would later screen that tape in meetings during which the producers were debating potential casting decisions. One day in anger, he merely clicked the monitor while they were in production. The meeting fell silent as Morita's audition flashed on the screen. Then Weintraub, the very same producer who had balked at even giving him a shot, spoke up, "Hey, wait a minute. That is Miyagi." Avildsen spun around and replied, "That's the Pat Morita you wouldn't read for the role." The tape did confirm that Morita was a thespian. It confirmed that he was Miyagi unlike anyone else. It was the fissure that began to breach the wall of resistance. Hollywood, of course, is not a place that surrenders something without a rub. Even when Avildsen's tape impressed, Morita found himself called back over and over and over again. They were producers, and they wanted to make certain. Could he do it twice? Could he do it in costume? Would he be able to keep pace alongside Ralph Macchio? Morita performed.